The gruesome bombardment of the Gaza Strip is continuing now into its 7th month, with no signs that carnage is going to stop anytime soon. Just last week, Israel rejected a ceasefire and intensified its bombing attacks on Rafah, conducting almost hourly aerial strikes. Back on October 7th, armed with AK-47s and motorcycles, Hamas managed to breach the Gaza fence, slaughtering and capturing hundreds of Israeli soldiers and civilians in southern Israel. They called it Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. So what did the Israeli government know and when? It's a question almost no one in media is asking, but we are. I'm investigative journalist Ben Swann, and this is Reckoning Israel and Gaza. 7 months ago, on October 7th, Hamas was able to carry out its shocking terror attack against Israel, despite Israel's intelligence, military, and security apparatus, commonly considered to be the best in the world. Bearing in mind Israel's incredibly sophisticated and capable defenses and brigades of trained IDF soldiers stationed near the Gaza border, the scale and the operational success of the Al-Aqsa flood attack surprised even Hamas. Hamas representative Ali Baraka explained to the Washington Post the ease with which Israel's entire security apparatus disintegrated, saying, quote, "We were expecting to get a smaller number of hostages and return to Gaza, but the Israeli army collapsed in front of us. What were we to do?" Well, in response to the Al-Aqsa flood attack, the Israeli military's retaliatory efforts, codenamed Operation Swords of Iron, has resulted in the deaths of over 100 journalists, 190 United Nations staff, 34,000 Palestinians, including 13,000 children, displaced nearly the entire Gaza population of 2 million people, and cost the United States almost $50 billion. So how did October 7th happen? Well, almost everyone in mainstream media was quick to call it an intelligence failure. The Guardian told its readers on the afternoon of October 7th that Hamas's murderous attack will be remembered as an Israeli intelligence failure for the ages. While the attack was still ongoing, on October 7th, Politico quoted Israel's former deputy national security advisor saying, quote, "It's a failure in terms of intelligence, operationally. It's clear that we were caught totally unprepared by this." And on October 8th, Jonathan Panikoff, former deputy national intelligence officer on the Middle East, who's now at the Atlantic Council think tank, firmly educated the public that, quote, "This was an intelligence failure. It could not be otherwise." In fact, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu quickly tweeted, then deleted a statement saying that he had absolutely no prior knowledge of this coming attack, saying, quote, "Under no circumstances and at no stage was Prime Minister Netanyahu warned of war intentions on the part of Hamas." The tweet said that before it was promptly deleted. Why did Netanyahu's team delete that tweet? Did he, in fact, have intelligence that there would be an attack by Hamas? Well, the evidence seems to point to only one answer: yes. Foreign security services, Israeli security services, and the Israeli public all knew that Hamas was planning a violent cross-border incursion where they would attempt to overrun and attack the kibbutz communities in southern Israel and then take prisoners back to Gaza. And they also knew when. But it happened anyway. 10 days before the attack, and then again 3 days before the attack, Egypt's intelligence officials actually sent repeated warnings to the highest levels of the Israeli government. In one of those warnings, Egypt's premier intelligence minister, General Abbas Kamel, personally called Netanyahu and warned him that Hamas was about to do, quote, "something unusual, a terrible operation." Unnamed Egyptian officials told Ynet News that they were shocked by Netanyahu's indifference to the news. But Israel didn't have to trust or believe Egypt, because actually most of the warnings of the October 7th attack came from Israeli civilians and the Israeli military itself. The civilians and soldiers who brought these emergency warnings to the military were ignored, and in some cases, strangely enough, threatened with legal action. So let's go all the way back to 2022 and then work our way forward to the days before the October 7th attacks. In 2022, the IDF, through confidential sources or spies in Gaza, actually obtained the detailed Hamas Al-Aqsa flood attack plans. Codenamed Jericho Wall by Israel, that incursion plan called for a barrage of rockets to begin the attack, and then for gunmen to pour into Israel en masse via paragliders, on motorcycles, and on foot, and then take hostages back into Gaza. All of it, every bit of that, happened on October 7th. Hamas followed its own blueprints that Israel already had in its possession with shocking precision. So Israel literally had the attack blueprints. But were they taken seriously by the IDF? Again, yes. The plans were diligently studied. In fact, a presentation on the planned attack was given to senior officers in the IDF's Gaza division. The presentation concluded with this sentence, quote, "This invasion constitutes the gravest threat that IDF forces are facing in the defense of Israel." So in response to all of this, did Israel's intelligence apparatus actually enhance or beef up their surveillance of the Hamas militants along the Gaza border? Well, actually, not only is the answer no, but stunningly, they did the exact opposite. They decided to entirely stop monitoring Hamas's handheld radio traffic because they saw it as a waste of effort. Even though during that same time, in 2022, Israelis living in the kibbutz communities near the Gaza border, most of whom have some type of military training because of Israel's mandatory IDF service laws, they were, according to Israeli media, picking up clear evidence that Hamas was practicing the breaching of the fence and conquering kibbutzim and seizing hostages and destroying everything in their path. Then in April of 2023, again, this is still 6 months before the attack, the IDF, according to Israeli media, actually did something even more surprising. They restricted the ability of Israeli citizens living along the border to monitor Hamas's wireless traffic. In September of 2023, that's less than a month before the attack, the head of the IDF's Devil's Advocate intelligence unit, which challenges prevailing narratives within Israel's military, twice alerted senior decision makers in both the army and the political spheres about Hamas's plans for a large-scale cross-border military operation. He reiterated those warnings in person at intelligence branch strategic assessment sessions on September 26th and September 27th. This is just days before the attack. During this period, again, just days before the Al-Aqsa flood attack, Israeli civilians residing in the kibbutzim near the Gaza border were witnessing with their own eyes and ears constant and enormous Hamas training exercises. The army reportedly turned a blind eye. One of these Israelis, Ben Shoshan, worked as a tour guide in the southeastern Israeli region surrounding Gaza. In a radio interview just days before October 7th, she remarked, quote, "Hamas has been training for weeks right up against the border, sometimes in massive numbers. I tried to warn the officers, but they told me I didn't know anything and that I was safe." On October 3rd, a journalist for Israeli Public Radio tweeted and made crystal clear that the bizarre and violent Hamas drills that were taking place on the Gaza side of the border were evident to everyone who was living alongside that border, including the Israeli military. The Islamic Jihad organization started noisy exercises very close to the border, with missile launches, simulating breaking into Israel and kidnapping soldiers. Didi Fold, a resident of Netiv Hatara, said it was significantly closer than previous times. The children wake up and they ask what's going on. There are explosions, booms. It is not similar to previous exercises. So it was clear to everyone that Hamas wasn't only planning to do something horrible, but it was also clear exactly what that horrible and evil thing was. According to a female IDF soldier who spoke to Israel's Channel 12 news program, she was constantly trying to warn her superiors about the gravity of the Hamas training exercises. And she was threatened with legal action, saying, quote, "We were told that if we continue to harass on this issue, you will stand trial." So, Egypt knew, the Israeli military knew, and the Israeli civilians knew. And yet 2 days before October 7th, the Israeli military took 2 entire commando brigades, that's around 100 soldiers, away from the soon-to-be breached locations of the Gaza border and sent them to the other side of the country, to the West Bank village of Huwara. Despite no Hamas presence being in Huwara, and despite there being giant Israeli dance parties taking place right along the same border fence where violent, escalating, and obvious Hamas drills of breaching and kidnapping were taking place. Does this make any sense? And have you heard about these dance parties? Because it turns out there's bizarre and inexplicable narratives surrounding the planning of these now infamous dance parties in Israel along the Gaza border. What had not been widely reported is the fact that there were actually 2 back-to-back dance parties in Kibbutz Riyam, which is also the location of the IDF's Gaza division, and it's only 3 miles from the Gaza border. The first party, planned months in advance, was a party called the Unity Festival. It took place on October 5th and 6th. Then the Nova Festival, the October 7th party, was actually added last minute, only a few days in advance of the event. So for obvious reasons, any significantly large gatherings on the Israeli side of the border with Gaza require Israeli military approval. Again, This is a part of the story that virtually no American media network will talk about. According to Israeli media reports, Lieutenant Colonel Sahir Fogel, an operations officer at the IDF's Gaza division, opposed the approval of the Nova Party based on a couple of things: the last-minute nature of its event application, the intensifying Hamas drills at the border, and because if something were to happen, more soldiers were on holiday. It was the Jewish holiday of Sukkot. The lieutenant colonel explained his opposition to the party's approval to his superiors, and he was instructed to allow the event to happen. Israeli newspaper Haaretz reported that other Gaza division officers privately told of irregular conduct and pressure surrounding the approval of that party. In February of 2024, Elkanah Fetterman, the head of security of the Nova Festival, gave an interview to Israel's Channel 14 where he made a statement that has not been reported on by any American media. He said this, quote, "I had a guard at the festival who had served in the Re'im division near the Gaza border. And a week before the festival, he sent me a voice message, basically warning me, saying, quote, Elkanah, something is going to happen over Sukkot. I just wanted to let you know there were a lot of warnings. I passed the voice message on to the local IDF officials, and they told me everything was all right." After the attack, Fetterman called his friend in the IDF and asked him exactly what he knew, saying, quote, "You were speaking in codes. Tell me exactly what they showed you." He told me, "Elkanah, they told me there was going to be an invasion and that they were planning to take over settlements. I just wasn't allowed to tell you that." And that's what happened. If he knew what he knew, a driver on the Gaza border, what did those above him know? Because he is a small screw in the system, end quote. The Hamas attacks were violent and brutal, and they've been likened to tragic events such as the September 11th attacks or even the Holocaust, which makes it strange that Benjamin Netanyahu and members of his party have at times described these attacks as somewhat of a political gift. Nassim Vaturi, a member of Netanyahu's party in the Knesset, referred to the attack as sort of a gift from God because they are being used to justify the current ongoing war, stating, quote, "We were meant to fight this war against Hamas, as is happening now, and luckily for us, it came from the heavens." Well, back in January, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu explained that Israel did not have the domestic or international support to invade or destroy Gaza. He said the October 7th Hamas attack solved both of those problems for him. Listen to this.
"We couldn't get the domestic consensus to make such a definitive solution to the problem of Hamas. That is, no one would agree across the Israeli public to go in and basically destroy Hamas, go throughout Gaza and destroy Hamas. We didn't have the international consensus either. Nobody would understand why are we doing it. Both conditions were created because of the Hamas savage attack on Israel on October 7th.
All of this information has been reported in isolation and without context. That is until now. But it in no way excuses the violent and brutal Hamas attacks of October 7th, in which so many lives were lost. But it does raise an important question, a question that brave people have to consider. Did the Israeli military, the Israeli intelligence community, and the political leadership of Israel allow this ghastly attack to happen to justify wiping out the population of Gaza? It also raises big questions for us. What type of war is the Biden administration and U.S. taxpayers supporting? Is this a war of self-defense, or is it genocide, justified by an attack that Israel likely could have stopped had it wanted to? These are heavy questions, but rather than simply dismissing what we're saying, prove me wrong. If you haven't already, you can follow us on X, Truth_in_media, or you can follow this series by signing up to see each episode as it comes out at truthinmedia.com. And at Truth in Media, you're going to find the transcript of this story along with the source articles. So check them out for yourself and continue to follow along as we continue to unveil the truth around Israel's war on Gaza.